anyhow, so let's do this. So yeah, for today, we're going to do our presentation. Definitely a very conversational sort of approach. So if there are any questions that come up, please feel free to ask them either through the chat or the question box as we go. And if there's anything we can answer quickly, very glad to do so during the presentation. And otherwise, we'll hold that off just for the end. And then at the end of the session, hoping to get the formal presentation done in about a half hour. And then at the end of the session, we'll do a Q&A. So any more complex questions that come up from it. And also would love to, we can have a look at anybody's website who's feeling brave, who might want to see how some of the things that we're going to discuss are manifesting themselves on their site. And then as well, after this, early next week, you'll get an email with the slides and a video to follow up. So certainly no need to take any notes or anything like that as we go, unless, of course, you're so inspired. So yeah, jumping right in. First off, it's kind of funny. I was kind of looking at the title of this webinar and kind of, thinking that, that coming up with that title is sort of I guess a marketing thing, which guilty as charged. I am a marketer. People get interested when you talk about how to deal with Google and how to deal with the changes in that. But really, this whole thing is not about Google. It's about your visitors. Google, of course, is important from a practical perspective in terms of showing up in front of your visitors. But really what we want to be thinking about is looking at our sites and looking at what's going on in Google with an eye to how we can improve our visitor experience. And in general, despite having some faults, Google is a pretty good organization, and they do definitely have a mission of improving visitor experience to websites. So long story short, if we take their advice, we should do a better job with our visitors. And it's kind of funny. I'll get into a couple stats now, but it's really ironic for many companies how low down their list of priorities site performance is. And this is particularly ridiculous when you actually look at some data here. So first off, and we're absolutely seeing this, that I remember the days years ago when it was sort of like 3 to 5% of site visits happening on phones. Now it's between 50 to 55% of all website visits worldwide are happening on phones. So this is something that can't be ignored. And in fact, some industries, like if you look at hospitality and travel, tourism, and also all the companies that are doing really engaging content strategies, the percentage of traffic in those areas is going to be even higher than 50 to 55%. So for instance, if you get a lot of traffic from social, you might even be looking at sort of 60, 70% of that traffic coming from mobile. So reason that, of course, is important is, according to Google, 53% of visits are actually abandoned if a mobile site takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And then looking at that in financial terms, Amazon has a study that's quite known in the industry, where they found that every 100 milliseconds, or every 1/10 of a second in latency or delay in loading, cost them 1% in sales for the vendors. And so in that case, a full second of delay would cost you 10% in sales if those numbers measured out for your own site. And then despite these first 3 bullets, apparently currently the average time it takes to fully load a mobile landing page is about 22 seconds. So this is obviously kind of ridiculous. And again, this is where we really need to look at site performance and get it higher up on the priority list. And then, so of course the question comes up of why are these sites so bad? Why do so many people have sites that suck? And that's sort of a funny way to put it, but that is really the only way to look at it. And first off, generally, site performance is almost never an item when companies are doing up requirements lists for their website. So, you might specify what pages, whether you're going to have a blog, whether you're going to have e-commerce, what features you need on your website. But we, as an agency that's done, say, hundreds of WordPress sites, we've never had a client who had a requirement that actually specified anything about performance. And that's a real challenge, and that's just really an educational thing, which of course is what we're trying to do here. So first tip, if you're getting a website built, absolutely put some requirements in there about how it needs to perform. And in terms of quantifying that, we'll be looking at some tools in a little while to measure performance that you can actually refer to. Another thing really is just that, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, although I would say becoming less so the more I learn over the years. But marketers and designers and developers, they're all drawn to shiny things. They want to do the newest, coolest looking technology. Let's load up some great looking sliders and huge photos. Let's get videos all over the site. And you end up with a site that looks incredibly cool, but is really heavy. All that stuff takes up a lot of bandwidth. So really it's critical to consider those things. And we're going to talk about them a bit more about that later, but really critical to consider how important these things are when you load them up and whether they're worth the performance hit that's taken. And then again, looking at, it's interesting. I see we have some questions coming in already, although the topic about mobile friendliness is going to come up in a little bit, so we'll touch on that then. And then lastly, another reason that sites typically perform so poorly is really also the accessibility of web development now. Anybody can do it, which is a fantastic thing. You can now use free plugins on WordPress to build a site either by yourself or for like a couple $1,000s that literally early in my career would have been a $30,000 website because all these pieces would be custom built. Now you can literally find free plugins for reservations or, a free plugin for your event listing. All these things are awesome, and it makes for an incredible opportunity, but really the challenge is that these are also sort of open marketplaces where there's not always really tight standards around who's creating these plugins. There's a lot of plugins and features that are really bloated and don't perform well. So, loading those onto your site can cause real issues. And then there's also the challenge that we see all the time of it's not really impressed upon, particularly folks that are new to site building. And again, fantastic that it's so accessible, but the downside is that it seems like, I'll just add this one and that one and that one and that one. And, a high performing WordPress website, for instance, you probably want to keep it to about 10 plugins at most. And that's not a hard and fast rule or anything, but just a general guideline. We've actually cracked open sites to diagnose them and discovered, this client has put 50 plugins on the back end. They've got plugins for social icons. They've got plugins for chat. They've got plugins for retargeting, just a million different things. And they all add to the page load and the page performance. And circling it around to the whole Google ecosystem that we're talking about, we get to a point of these are all these are all going to affect your search rankings. And so Jack asks, can you tell a plugin's performance before using it? And the answer is kind of no. That said, most plugins, you can find reviews on them, you can find information. You could Google, is XYZ plugin slow? And you'll probably find some results if it is, of people complaining about it. And then really the most notable thing, if you're sort of a DIY WordPresser, which kind of funny, but I would consider myself in that category because I do goof around with it, but the team doesn't allow me to do it professionally. So if you're like me in those regards and not a developer, but you're building a WordPress site, one great way of checking a plugin performance is just look at the site, measure it with some of the tools we're going to look at in a moment, and then load the plugin. Just don't change anything about the site, but just load and fire up that one single plugin. Don't even worry about configuring it to start, but just load the plugin into your WordPress site and then go and check the performance. And you'll get a great idea of what it's costing you in terms of having it in there. So with that said, we've talked about rankings, and again, a Google webinar, so we're really definitely focusing on rankings. But so other than rankings, why does it matter? And I couldn't help myself with this funny picture. I was deliberating between an image of a huge apartment building on a rickety foundation, or instead I did come up with the beaten up old Lada car with fancy wheels on it. And essentially your website is the car. You could add great wheels, you could put a spoiler on it, you can do just about anything you want to it, but anything you do on top of that website is going to still be part of that website. And in practical terms, I included a screenshot from analytics for somebody we've just started working with. And of course, as you can see, it's anonymous, but it's looking at their, from Google Analytics, looking at their main different channels of social, direct, which is people coming directly to the site or untracked, organic search, and referral traffic. And the really salient point there is if we look at social traffic, it's like scrolling over to the right, it's like, oh, over 90% of the people coming from social sources are leaving immediately. They're not looking at a second page or anything. They're bouncing at a 90% rate. Go look further down. Another really valuable source of traffic, referral, which refers to people when you're linked to from other sites. Those sites are referring to your site. So that's where people clicking on those links from other sites come to your site. Oh, they're losing 89% of their traffic from those sources. So these are, and this example is really good because it is a site that is bloated and slow. And one critical point to consider as well is that there's a vast difference between website visitors that already know you. If somebody already knows you or knows about your service or has been told about you from a colleague or friend, they're going to be a little bit more patient. However, if you're looking at somebody that's visiting from clicking on a link on another site or a social visit, or a really good example is search ads where they've never heard of your company before, or any ads where they've never heard of your company before, they have no trust, they have no patience, they have no relationship to keep them on the site any longer. So we'll see dramatic differences in the bounce rate. And these were reflected right here in this example. You can see the social and referral traffic is bouncing at basically 9 out of 10 people are leaving immediately. Whereas, it's only 5 to 6 people out of 10 that are leaving immediately from the organic, where there's probably some knowledge there, and from the direct, which in the direct case of direct, somebody is going to have some sort of relationship with you. So again, I just can't stress it enough. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that in putting together this webinar, it occurred to me that when we're doing advertising with clients that have slow sites, I think I need to start expressing to them in dollar figures what percentage of their advertising is actually just going up in smoke because of their performance. And looking at it in those terms, it's pretty crazy. But if somebody said to you, "Oh yeah, your advertising is costing an extra 40% because your site's too slow," people would probably take it a lot more seriously. Anyhow, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. And there's a question that just popped in about why the bounce rate is so high in the first place for all searches. And in general, I mean, there's a million factors there. And to be fair, it's rare to see a bounce rate below about 30%. Part of that too, which I didn't mention because it gets into this really complex topic, but part of it is that if somebody comes to your site and reads a single page, or somebody lands on your contact page who is looking for your phone number, gets that information and leaves, that technically is a bounce, although they had a successful visit. So not all bounces are bad, but when you see bounce rates up in the 80 and 90% range, that's definitely bad. So yeah, again, we can circle back around to that again as well. But in short, 30, 40%, fairly common. When you see bounce rates over 50%, it's time to investigate sort of where you're sitting and what you should be looking at. And with this, everyone's different. So that's something that having a look at the individual sources. And actually that would be, I said I was going to carry on, but I can't help myself from finishing there. One thing to look at in analytics would be to see if there's dramatically different bounce rates between sources. And some sources are always going to be high, like for instance, display advertising always has high bounce rates, whereas your organic search should be very much probably your lowest bounce rate. And if you see aberrations in that, then definitely worth digging further. But again, I'm at risk of getting too deep in there. So circling back around, the title of this webinar talking about these Google changes. So what are these changes? And there's a few. One is actually a very minor one, but I included it mostly because it's a pet peeve of mine, is that Google has made some updates on their info around linking schemes and link building. We'll talk about this more in a bit, but essentially it's buying links versus earning them, and Google does not like that. So we'll touch on that quickly. And my pet peeve is actually companies doing it, not the fact that Google's cracking down on it, by the way. In March, there was a complete move to mobile-first indexing. So what that means in English is that Google, instead of basically indexing the entire web via a computer, they are simulating it as if they're crawling each and every website, every single website on the web that's accessible. The crawling is done as if they were on a phone. So that's a pretty important consideration to think of. And then the other big one is that as of May next month, Google has announced that they're adopting what they call Core Web Vitals as a ranking factor, which we're going to look at in a minute. That combined with the fact that website speed is already a known ranking factor, these changes are just way too big to ignore. And so here we are. So big question that comes up is where, like this, quite honestly, this is a bit of a pain in a sense. And we certainly know the pain, with literally hundreds of websites in the field, many of which were built at times of dramatically different standards. There's a lot of slow sites even that we're involved in out there. So it's kind of like, oh my gosh, we have to go in and be proactive on this, and nobody really enjoys, there's a lot of joy in launching a great looking site. There's not a whole lot of satisfaction except for sort of developer type folks about going in and spending the laborious time to improve performance. But that said, there is a big opportunity there. First off, it will improve your yield on all of your marketing efforts. Period, full stop. This is not a topic for debate. The faster your site and the better the experience, the more successful your marketing will be. So in areas where you're on the cusp of being profitable with marketing or not, it quite possibly could be enough to push it over the top. And again, the higher you can push your conversion rate, the more competitive you can be, the more you can grow your marketing. So it's huge. It's also good for your brand. It's funny because I never really hear this topic come up much, but a site that loads slowly and that people groan as they're waiting for the next page to load, that's bad for your brand. People that will reflect on everything about you. People will, even if it's subliminally, people will just think that you're not a leading edge company, or it just brings into question sort of how, especially with technical companies, it brings into question like, well, how good your services will be if your website stinks so bad. The other opportunity that I always like to look at and get excited about, and this is why why as an entrepreneur I get excited about is basically anytime there's a change, there's an opportunity. And so there are all these fairly dramatic changes happening. Most people are quite slow to take advantage of them. So here's where it becomes a competitive opportunity. If you move quickly, it's a great time to make up ground or even get out ahead of some of your competition. And that's funny, this screenshot that I have on here actually shows some real world core web vitals, basically from a study that was done in 2020. And long story short, it shows that on these different platforms, looking at mobile, there's a low of 8% and a high of 21% of sites that came up with good ratings. Even just good, not great, but even just good ratings from a mobile web vital perspective. And the lowest there is Wix. The next lowest is WooCommerce, and what that will mean is, and these are e-commerce sites in this example, but that'll be WordPress sites with WooCommerce loaded. That's an example of WooCommerce is a great plugin, but if you don't configure it well, it can be ridiculously slow. And then even Shopify, and we're going to have a look at a Shopify site during this process. Somebody was brave, Erin was brave and volunteered her site, and actually it looks great, but even Shopify, where they control most of these technical factors, you can still have challenges getting a good site experience. So anyhow, here's the great opportunity to get a quick competitive win. So now getting into the practical stuff, how do I get my site in shape? And I've got this shot from Google, and it talks about these core web vitals, and then it refers to these 4 other factors in terms of how they look at page experience. So we're gonna look through these individually, and we'll actually start with the simpler ones first, which is the actually the mobile friendly one is the first of those factors we're going to look at. But also in terms of that, one other element I mentioned, the link building. Essentially, from what we can see, Google is really starting to crack down on the paid links. And essentially, this is where, and it's funny, you see a screenshot from a known national provider down on the right. I've actually witnessed this marketing services provider. I've seen accounts that they've worked on. I've seen them do very irresponsible stuff. I'm not going to name them after saying that, but they actually refer to link building. They're doing link building, which is essentially going out and getting links from sites by paying to get links on those sites. They're typically garbage sites. We're going to have a look at that as well. But where this does become a real liability is that there's actually a tool where people, and you can see the screenshot of that as well, there's a tool where people can actually now report that you're doing paid links to your website. So it's kind of funny because it's an area where some companies have done reasonably well in terms of, they've done reasonably well with rankings through doing this paid link building. However, Google sees it as cheating, and if you get caught, which is actually fairly easy, either by the automation at Google or through the reporting, that can be something that can take forever to recover from. So let's leave that at that, but definitely you want to avoid any kind of paid link building. So that's the first thing that we'll mention, which again isn't really much on the technical side, but more just on an area we've been kind of working through and seen some really bad examples of. So I did just want to raise that. So first off, mobile friendly, really simple to see if your site is mobile friendly. And you can have a look on the site. And again, these slides will be shared, so you'll have access to the links. And I do have some examples. So if I can successfully alt tag my way over there. There's an example of site, and this is interesting. So this is an example of somebody who's attending today who offered Boko, which is a great company, offered up their site to have a look at. Their site actually works on mobile. Really, no, I mean, could possibly use an update, but there's no issues with viewing it on the phone. I went and checked, but for some reason, this is how Google is seeing it. So this is definitely something that would be worth digging a bit further to check out and find out why that is, and fixing it so that Google is properly seeing it. And also, just to be fair, no alarm bells should go off. This is an example of, maybe it's not even an issue. And this is where digging it in a bit deeper in Google Search Console would probably help, because Google Search Console will provide a bunch of information about the indexing. So anyhow, that's the mobile friendly test. Realized that I did forget to show, this is how we can, going back to that questionable linking, if you want to see what links are linking to your site currently, and if there's any issues, it's actually quite straightforward. There's this moz.com has this link explorer tool that will show you all the links to your site. So in this example, I just dialed in Search Kings, which is actually a great company. They do search marketing. And so in this example, it shows the domain authority of the site. It shows, oh, look, here's the 886 linking domains to their website. So you want to check these links, you can actually just click on this linking domains, and you get a list of all the domains that are linking. So rather than make you wait through this process, I did download the spreadsheet, which you can see there's an export CSV there. So I grabbed that spreadsheet. And so I've also gone through the exercise of sorting it according to spam score, which Moz, the Link Explorer, also assesses a spam score, which is how likely it is that basically it's a garbage site that's linking to you. So I sorted it from high to low. And so interesting too, because with almost 900 linking domains, this site should have a way higher domain authority than 19. That's 19 out of 100. Topic for a different webinar, but nonetheless, we can look like, oh, there's this www.net, with a 99% spam score. This is clearly garbage. You could go and look at these sites and you'll find that they're garbage. And this is how, on behalf of clients, we've often discovered that, oh, you have a horrible linking profile. And in this case, just having a look, they actually have, and 40 is kind of considered a watershed. Like, you want a spam score absolutely at below 30. And look at this, they've got this Globe site is going to be garbage with like 8 or 10 different country domains. And so it's kind of like, oh, well, with 120 some odd sites that have a spam score of higher than 40, Google's going to see that they're garbage, that their linking structure rather is garbage, not their site is garbage, but that they're almost certainly have been engaging in some linking practices that are not responsible and not natural. And so, again, that could be a topic for a whole session of how to get into the linking and link building. So we won't go any further, but just wanted to share in this moz.com tool, it will do a certain number of free searches. So you can probably check out your own site for free, or even I highly recommend, there's a whole bunch of other stuff it can do as well. So you can even subscribe for a month, which is like $50 or something, and get a ton of valuable information out of there. Another quick note is you can actually use this tool to look at all your competitors and find out what sites are linking to them. And then maybe you can find some great places that you can register your site or get links from. Anyhow, we'll stop on that note. Back to the mobile friendly, fairly straightforward there. And then back to our presentation. Safe browsing was the next thing that Google mentions. And generally, there's really nothing proactive you have to do on this front. You'll get a warning if there are safe browsing issues come out for your site, but you can read more about it. There's a URL here. One that's kind of interesting, and actually I was quite surprised to see a very sort of high-end potential client that we might be doing some work with just last week, who was like, oh, they don't have HTTPS. And essentially it's just having your SSL certificate properly installed at your host. This is now a free service with most hosts. And if your host wants to charge you to install an SSL certificate, you might want to reconsider your host. It's just, it's sort of a price to play now, and should be a basic feature with your hosting. Next one they had was no intrusive interstitials. And basically Google feels that your site experience is diminished if somebody has a window that comes up and takes over your page and overlaps it. And this just totally cracked me up because this, as I was doing some additional research for this presentation, on a post about Core Web Vitals and site experience, this interstitial popped up right where it was talking about the interstitials. And I think we do have an actual example of that. Yeah, this is Neil Patel, who's actually a really well-known web marketer. This is actually after about 10 seconds of reading a blog post, this is what happens. This overlay comes up that totally obscures his blog post. It's possible that he's figured out how that to not affect his Google indexing. More likely, he's realized that he gets more signups by doing it. This is a really smart individual who's really looked closely at this. So I would strongly suspect that in this example, this marketer knows what it's costing him in terms of user experience, but it's probably worth more to him in terms of getting more signups by having this rather intrusive feature. So anyhow, and again, that's where, as a real theme, I don't want to sound like you should just have the most bare site with nothing on it. All these features can be great. What I would say, though, is just make sure that you understand what the trade-off is. And anytime you add a feature that takes away from the overall load time and user experience, you should, on the flip side, you should know what value you're getting out of it. Like, is it even strategic? So moving along out of those simple ones, we'll get into the speed and Core Web Vitals stuff. And you know what? I mean, there's a sort of trade-off here. I mean, unfortunately, we can't get too crazy deep into the technical elements here, but we will sort of go through and have a look at it. So first off, in the Core Web Vitals is your largest contentful paint, which essentially is that loading thing that Google discussed there. And that's basically how long it takes for your biggest content element to load. And in doing some research, I came across a site. I'll hit return now. Oh, here comes the site. Oh, there's no images, nothing's happening. And yeah, it kind of takes forever. And so that's an example of something that's taking, oh, that's our next one, taking forever to load. Anytime that you have to wait for something to load, that's a big issue. And how Google is measuring it in these Core Web Vitals is how long it takes for that single biggest content element to load. Another one is first input delay or interactivity. In some tools, it's referred to as total blocking time. And there's a technical reason for that. We won't get into it, but total blocking time is a good proxy for the first input delay. And essentially, that's how long it takes for a site to respond to your interaction. So, I mean, a good example would be, and they actually do a good job of it. So MEC loads up, I click a button, get ready to camp. As you can see, that was instant. There was no input delay. That said, lots and lots and lots of sites, even well-known national ones, you click on something, it takes forever for the next page to come up. It takes forever for a form to submit. That's what they're referring to in terms of input delay. And then lastly, they talk about cumulative layout shift, or visual stability is how they refer to it in the grid that we looked at. And that's the degree to which the elements on the page jump around during the loading time. And sort of a funny one, but I have a sample, and I've included the samples because it gets me all the time. So here's Zoom, pretend I'm logging into Zoom. It loads up, oh, I'm gonna click on webinars, and boom, that watch live thing popped in, pushed the rest of the page down, and all of a sudden I'm clicking on meetings when I was meaning to click on webinars. That's annoying as hell, and that's basically what cumulative layout shift is. And essentially, you don't want it. So digging in, there are some tools. These are the most common tools that we use. We literally use these tools every single day around here in our company. So let's just dig into them without further ado. So the first one is Google Pagespeed. I want to say that I want to share that you're probably going to be horrified the first time you run your site through Google Pagespeed. It's really, really harsh, particularly on WordPress sites. So I'm going to say take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. Most people that try it, they're going to get a failing rating of between 0 and 49, but definitely it's not quite as bad as it is going to sound. But let's have a quick look at Google Pagespeed. And so I have an example here. These take a little while to load, so I've preloaded some things. Google Pagespeed by default defaults to mobile, and I picked here the BC Ferry site just simply because I know there's an absolute ton that goes on behind the scenes on this site. So incredibly hard site to optimize for some of these things. But as you can see, here's the field data. It's also a great example because it shows all the different type of data. Most of us with smaller websites, Google will actually not show field data because it doesn't have enough data from actual user visits. There's actually a lot of green going on here. So by and large, they're doing pretty good, but we can see here there's the first contentful paint, takes 1.6 seconds before anything's showing up on the site to see. There's that largest contentful paint one that's 3.7 seconds. First input delay, 17 milliseconds, so that one's passing, that's great. And then the cumulative layout shift, that's the jumping around that we talked about, they give it a 0.35 rating, and it's supposed to be no more than 0.1. So they show the field data. Again, we're not going to be able to see the field data in most cases. Interestingly, you can also click on Origin Summary, which shows all the activity across the domain. The field data, if it shows up for you, shows just the page that you have input. The Origin Summary shows the entire domain. And then scrolling down, this is what most of us are going to be able to see, which is the lab data, which is with the test that's running on it, and how long it takes for these things to happen. And we're not going to get too far into here, but it's like, oh, there's these render blocking resources. You can drop down. Again, this is getting way too techy, but it shows the different things that are taking time to load. It suggests stuff around text compression, and it actually shows the resources that would benefit from that. It's like, oh, their root info. There's 420K, which is almost half a meg. So that's very significant on mobile. If there was a way that they could enable that text compression, that would be great. Again, we won't jump too far in there. Looking at another site, a brave participant today of Peacock and Fig offered their site up to have a look at. Their site performs really well in terms of that first input delay. It looks great on the cumulative layout shift. And there's this first contentful paint and largest contentful paint are both not looking so great. And this is where you can actually get into some details here. And we're not going to necessarily be able to get into a lot of details here, but we go to, oh, largest contentful paint, 11.4 seconds in the lab. So we can scroll down, and this is where, as much as, again, I'm not a developer, so I don't understand all this stuff, but it's like, oh, warnings. Oh, Google's unable to locate a bunch of resources. So for some reason, it's saying that all these resources can't be found. So maybe there's some sort of error that's going on, or maybe these are legacy files that are no longer on there. Definitely worth figuring out, a whole lot of them. Properly sized images. This is one that everybody should look for because it's one of the absolute most common things we see. If we click down, we can see, there's all these files that are quite big. So this solarized JPEG is 590K. That's really big for an image. So even just by resizing it to the right size, and what that means is it's been included on the site. It might be, say, a full screen image that's being displayed in one column. So the image is actually bigger in terms of dimensions than it needs to be. So just having a glance there, I can see that there's probably at least a couple of megs to be saved right there, which is just mammoth on mobile. And then efficiently encode images. And that is basically the image compression, which is also important. And again, so it's showing the same numbers, but so long story short, there's a ton of space to be saved by compressing these properly. And there's a lot of images, so particularly important there. Going down, there's this initial server response time of 1.15 seconds, which is a long time for a site to respond. That could point to a hosting issue. We'll touch on that a bit briefly in a moment, but I think we'll leave that there for the moment. I think we just had, oh yeah, actually the Shopify site that I mentioned before I jump forwards. Here's an example of a Shopify site. As you can see, they're doing 40 out of 100, which is actually pretty good for a mobile site using this Pagespeed tool. We'll discuss that a little bit further. Again, but this is where, can we do better? And this is where we scroll down to the opportunities. So we've got removed unused JavaScript. There's this stuff going on. If there was a crazy plugin that was taking up a bunch of size, or sorry, a crazy application on Shopify that was taking up a bunch of extra size, you might be able to identify it there. In general there, you're not going to be able to touch the script on Shopify because it's a proprietary platform, actually quite an efficient platform. And that's actually a real benefit of it, is that it does remove most of the issues already. But then, properly sized images. So it's saying there's a potential savings of a second there. And again, this is not a huge win, but if you look at the cumulative savings here, it might be worth going in and optimizing these a bit further. And then again, just from looking at it, we can click on this and actually see the image. And so that's it. So that image itself is appearing sort of on the site at a much smaller size. So there's the sizing, and there's probably some optimization to be done there as well. So there's probably even bigger savings than that 46K it mentions. But anyhow, in general, this is a fairly decent performing site. There's not a whole lot that you can do on the Shopify platform, and probably at 40, it's going to be all right there. So moving along, GT Metrix. GT Metrix is generally, it's as informative as Pagespeed and not quite as harsh with its ratings. So it's a little gentler. And actually there's a paid version as well that we've recently started subscribing to that allows you to select your internet speed levels. So in the Google Pagespeed, you can pick your mobile or your desktop view. In GT Metrix, you can pick between a number of sources, and we'll just jump over here. I think we've got a couple of GT Metrix examples here. John, thanks for volunteering, Arctic Spas. And again, we're seeing in GT Metrix, it's looking at your desktop version. It's not as harsh as the Google's Pagespeed. You probably want a B or an A rating here. So again, and actually looking at this, like, the blocking time is 0, the cumulative layout shift is 0. And really it looks like the issue is with this largest contentful paint. So what's causing that? Well, we scroll down and GT Metrix makes it very clear, is avoid enormous network payloads. And it says that the total size was 4.35 megs. We look in, it's like, there's a bunch of largish files. So we could look at that. And then of course down here, it says properly sized images. And right off the bat, it says potential savings of 1.79 megs. So that's huge. And that's where we didn't look at this site in Pagespeed, but it would probably get hammered in Pagespeed because, again, Pagespeed is looking at it from a mobile perspective. GT Metrix is looking at it on a desktop perspective. But yeah, almost 2 megs of unnecessary size loading on a phone is absolutely going to be hurting all the marketing and all the traffic to the site around that. There's a couple other minor things, but it'd be awesome. I'd love to see the before and after of just fixing all those images and seeing what happens when it shows up in GT Metrix. Another example, there's an Arctic Spas Vancouver Island one that we had to look at. And it gets an F, and that's on the desktop. So it's taking almost 9 seconds to load. So it's just definitely, and actually my bad. This one is where I mentioned you can choose. We actually chose to look at it on a phone. So whereas this is the desktop view, we click to the phone view, which you do need to do the paid one to check this. And it's like, yeah, if it is taking 9 seconds to load on the site. That's pretty huge, and a 4.3 meg total size. And again, they have the recommendations down below. So again, it's like the scaled images. And it says here, the following images are resized in HTML or CSS. So it could save 3.3 megs or an 84% reduction. So that's, again, that's just giant and definitely something we want to look at. Quick win there. And then it gets into the optimizing images. Last couple looks at GT. Another Victoria site. This is an interesting one because to look at it, it's not performing where it should be, but to scroll down and look at it, there are no big issues. The images are not an issue, but the response time is taking 2 seconds. So, and then scrolling a bit further, we can see the whole size of that page is only 1 meg, but yet it's taking 5 seconds to load. So realistically, a meg site should and could load on desktop in like a second. And so when we see this reduced initial server response time, the absolute first thing that we'd look at in this case is, well, where is it hosted? Is there an issue with the hosting? Is there something going on there? Like maybe it's on a shared host where 50 other sites are sharing the hosting, which always slows things down. Looking at one last example, again, we talked about the Shopify site, Bugenhead. Again, there's a limited amount of things you can do on Shopify, and by and large, like the web vitals here are looking good, except for that largest contentful paint. So again, this is a different view of what we saw in the Google Pagespeed. Most of these things you can't change, and actually so again, properly sized images. It's saying here 518K. So that's half a meg. So it's actually saying it's a low impact, but that's because we're looking at the desktop. When you're looking at the desktop view, it is good to be mindful of how it's going to be impacting your mobile. And in that case, definitely doing these image sizes would make a difference. So there's some opportunity there, just at a glance, to save at least probably half a meg there. So that would be, again, that would be the quick win, would be to try those and see what happens there. So after going through that, I'm sure I confused the hell out of everybody. I kind of confused the hell out of myself in going through that process. There is a lot to consider, but individually you could definitely look at it. And actually there's a good question, and thank you on that front. I will answer a couple quick questions. One is, why is mobile slower to load? And basically it's because a data signal, and this is not mobile, this is not looking at your phone sitting in your home when you're on Wi-Fi. This is out being on the data network. And in my case, like LTE data compared to my 400 meg sort of wired connection in my office is, well, my math's bad, but it's about 1/30 as fast. So it's basically, yeah, mobile just takes, between the hardware and the connection speed over data, it just takes way longer. Someone else, I just noticed Dan was asking about a balance with the image sizes in terms of art and design. So Dan, you're absolutely right. Dan asked about you need bigger and better quality images. Absolutely. Where the waste is that once you're meeting the threshold where an image looks perfect on a screen, you can still save it with higher quality settings that aren't visible. So pretty much all those recommendations that we looked at are how much size can be saved while still preserving the quality. And again, that could be a webinar in itself in terms of quality. So anyhow, it's funny, I almost hesitated in doing this slide because it is really hard to give really good advice on what exactly you should be striving for. The most important and meaningful metric from a pure SEO perspective is that you want to be better than your competition. And I know we've got some attendees from the auto industry today, and that's an example where we've done some work in that industry, and typically those sites are huge because they've got a ton of inventory, they've got a ton of imagery, and nobody's going to get an A rating with one of those sites typically. That said, you can go and run those reports on all your competition and make sure from an SEO perspective, as long as you're doing better than your competition, then you're probably looking good on the SEO front. And the other meaningful metric is just the observed behavior for how it looks when you're on your computer or on your phone. If your visitors are going to be frustrated, then that's no good. Otherwise, looking at the Google page speed, we kind of consider a practical minimum to be about a 30 out of 100 on mobile, which is still in Pagespeed's eyes, it's still a failed rating. But in terms of what we've seen with all the websites we look at and where most people sit, that would be kind of a practical minimum. Obviously, the higher the better, and we want to shoot for higher than that. But sort of a good note, basically, if you don't have a 30 rating on mobile, you want to get to there at minimum. And of course, higher is always better. And for desktop, really, most people on desktop and laptops, it's really more about observed speed than what the page speed rating shows, particularly because Google is now indexing on mobile. So your desktop page speed itself is probably not going to affect your rankings, but your mobile definitely can. In the GT Metrix one, if you're looking at the standard speed settings for your GT Metrix test, you basically want to shoot for A or B ratings across the board, and at least amber on those web vitals, noting that when it jumps to mobile, it's going to be less than that. So that's where I'd say an A on the basic ones would be what you want to look at. And if not, you want to get at least a B and at least amber, and really you want to be shooting for green across the board on the GT Metrix. And there's some quick wins where often you can achieve those just by doing those. We'll look at those in a moment. One last tool that we're not going to dig too far into, but Google Search Console, you can install that on your site, and it will actually show you which URLs need improvement. And as you can see in the screenshot on the left, it'll show you sort of your mobile usability, your breadcrumbs. It doesn't provide as detailed information typically as the page speed test. Probably a good sign I need to sip of my coffee. Brain's slowing down a bit. Looking here, clicking in, I've got an actual one open with only half the window showing because I've got to maintain some privacy here for this particular site. But you can look in, it's like, oh, there's the mobile, and it shows, oh, just 13 URLs needing improvement of the ones that Google's looked at. You can click to open a report, and it will show you the issues. And it's like, oh, cumulative layout shift and largest contentful paint longer than 4 seconds. That's huge. So absolutely, those two things need to get taken care of. So again, different way of getting some of the same information. Can never have too much information. That said, again, let's look at some quick wins. And I think we covered it fairly well, but definitely looking at your image sizing and optimization in those tools. That's the single biggest, most common one we see. And I would say, again, looking at sites literally daily, 80 to 90% of sites that we look at have room to improve their image sizing and optimization, even maintaining 100% quality. There's a challenge. Lots of sites, especially older ones, have loaded, oh, they put Google Analytics on a few years ago. Oh, they put a different version of Google Analytics on the site. They might load up Google Tag Manager. They might have some HubSpot tags. They might have the Facebook Pixel on there. Those tools individually are all great, but what we see is that folks just often add them and add them and add them, and nobody ever takes them away. So for ones that you're not using, there can be a lot of script and a lot of garbage that's on there. So definitely worth looking at that. On WordPress in particular, plugins impact site speed. So we'll find lots of folks that have plugins that aren't even being used anymore that are still running on their sites. So again, removing any plugins or any site features that are not being used, that's critical. And also, if you have a plugin that you're wondering if it's hurting your performance, maybe pick a time when there's not traffic on the site and you can actually just pause the plugin, or rather deactivate the plugin, and see if performance changes. And if you see a super dramatic performance, you probably have to go and reactivate it if your site depends on the plugin. But then you'll know that you might want to look at replacing that plugin with a faster version. We often see that there are some sites and some themes in WordPress and other platforms that load all kinds of fonts and style sheets that they don't necessarily need to. So that's something definitely you need help from a developer for, but removing those can be huge. Big one is removing any videos that don't serve a strategic purpose. And everybody loves videos. They look really cool on the site, but you really want to, they can slow things down. So you really want to make sure that there's a strategic reason why you have them. Or you'll want to configure your website, which you can usually do, particularly in WordPress themes. You can configure your site so that videos don't appear on mobile. And that's kind of the best of both worlds, because really nobody wants to load a video on their data plan. So if you can do that, that's a great, there you go. Sorry, I just saw the messages flashing, but I think we're good on that front. Another one is sliders. And I think I did call up an example with sliders. And these are having images that scroll across your page. Let me just jump over. And we have folks from Vivitro and Starfish here today. Great products, wonderful site. And you can see these images that are scrolling across the screen. This is a very, very popular convention used by tons and tons of companies. There are situations where it makes sense, but most of the times we see it used, see these sliders used, they're actually not very strategic. And the reason for that is people have no patience. They jump on, so typically, somebody might see the first or second slide before they scroll on and get to whatever information they're looking for. So there's a nice thought that you can tell a story or feature a whole bunch of things by having them in a slider. That said, if you have messaging or imagery that you really need to show, if it's not on that first slide or possibly the second slide, it's going to be invisible. People just aren't going to see it. So that's where typically they're often not very strategic. And the challenge is too, they take up a lot of size. All those images take up a lot of size. And actually some of the great, really useful and slider plugins, for instance, on WordPress, are very heavy in their own right. So that's another challenge as well. Again, can't get too deep into that, but that's definitely something to look at. And again, sliders are great if they're strategic. Most of them aren't. So give that some thought. Another thing is just basically making sure you're on a decent WordPress host if you're on a WordPress site. And most folks these days are either on like Shopify or Squarespace or Wix, where you can't really, the host is built into the service. Most everybody else is on WordPress, most popular platform on the planet right now. Not all hosts are created equal. So again, a shared hosting for a WordPress site that's not optimized for WordPress, probably doing you a dramatic disservice. And the cheap, jumping from a $10 a month host to a $25 or $30 a month host seems like, if you don't appreciate the difference in performance, it seems like a jump for no reason. But realistically, there's a ton of difference at that level. If you are looking for a real budget option, SiteGround is not a bad budget option, sort of way better than some of the other ones out there. And we love Flywheel. We're actually a reseller for Flywheel hosting, which is a fantastic mid-priced host. I will do a shameless plug and mention that if anybody needs hosting, chat with me about Flywheel. We have some spaces on our agency plan, and happy to offer free hosting until the end of the year if anybody wants to consider that. And with that said, we're a little slower than planned. I was hoping to leave more time for Q&A, although fortunately we did accomplish most of the Q&A as we went. So I think we're doing pretty good on that front. And the one challenge is that there is no overcoming a bad host. If you're on a bad host, you got to move to a good host. And a really poorly built website on a crappy theme, you might have to rebuild. That said, luckily, themes, the most popular WordPress themes are usually pretty good. There are a couple of there's WordPress sort of content managers and themes like Divi and Elementor that can be fantastic and really empowering, can be known to be a bit slow if you don't know about optimizing them. So you definitely want to do your research before you jump in on a WordPress theme or site or sort of solution on that front. But yeah, in general, for anybody in the session, I would recommend going through what you can with the quick wins, particularly the images. You'll have to learn a tiny bit about optimizing your images, but if you're managing your own website, you should absolutely have that knowledge anyhow. Images, turn off the extra plugins, kill any extra videos and sliders, and there's a really good chance you'll be at a decent level at that point already. We do have some helpful links, just basically the ones that we chatted about, and as well there's a couple of posts. And again, the shameless plug, if you have any questions at all, more than happy to help. We have our agency, Plus ROI Online Marketing. We've been around for, 3 months shy of 14 years now. And we do marketing for companies that are basically in competitive markets, sort of regionally or nationally. And then on the flip side, we have our Jumpstart Web division, which offers really streamlined packages around advertising and promotion for typically local service and local businesses. On that note, I always love connecting on LinkedIn. So, I mean that sincerely. If anybody has any straightforward questions about this stuff, please feel free to reach out. Always happy to answer questions. And if something's too complex, I'll just share that it's too complex. Fortunately, we have a great team that has some deeper skills as well that I can refer to. So with that said, I appreciate people. We are on the hour, so folks are going to be dropping off. Obviously, the formal part is finished, but I'm happy to answer any and all questions. So if anybody has any questions, just let me know. And if not, we'll wrap up and go there. And so Chris asks, when I run a website through the mobile-friendly test, it shows the site is poor. However, the website is not displayed as I would see it on an actual mobile device. Any idea why? So that's probably an example similar to what we looked at, and I'll just probably similar to what we looked at, where Google's probably having a challenge indexing it. So there are certain things where the way you code things can prevent Google from seeing things. So long story short, I can't answer that question, although definitely loading up the Google Search Console and digging in further using a few tools and figuring that out will be important. The one feature that I haven't used Google Search Console extensively myself for a while, but we used to use a feature where you could crawl it as if you were Google. And that feature, assuming that's still in there, should give you some good insights. And I see Dana is asking about a photo optimizing plugin on my site. And just to share with the group what that is you can actually have plugins that will automatically optimize all the photos on your website. And I would recommend loading one to catch any blog images or anything that any images that haven't been properly optimized. One challenge with them is typically they will optimize and compress photos, but they typically don't resize them. So long story short, the first step is generally to resize the photos to the pixel dimensions that they're going to be displayed at. And then ideally, if they're important images like on your homepage, you can optimize them manually to make sure that you're maintaining the quality that you want to see. And then lastly, I do recommend using good photo optimizing plugin on the site to catch anything that might get missed. For instance, somebody who posts a blog forgets to optimize one. That said, I will have to get back to Dana on the specific recommendation. I know within our company we've done a few of them, so I will follow up and send a note on which one we'd recommend. And I can see we're down to just one or two folks. So what's a good size before further optimization? So that's a great question. And it depends on the exact photo. So for instance, there are things like even just using the right format. So for instance, lots of folks save photos as PNGs, which are very high quality, but really the only benefit of a PNG is that you can have a transparent background with it. So if you have a cropped image, or rather an image that's sort of distinct, has a distinct non-rectangular shape, it can be overlaid over backgrounds or other images. That's where a PNG shines. It doesn't actually compress much. So PNGs typically, for instance, might be 0.5 meg, and there's nothing you can do about that. With a JPEG image, you could likely use the same image at around 100K. And it's kind of funny because we've had this discussion debate internally, and you can have all different sizes of images. There's one person on our team who says that no image should be bigger than about 70K, even a full screen image. I've never quite been comfortable with that number because I think that does get to a point of risking quality, but certainly if you're doing it perfectly, you can do a full screen image as a JPEG in the 130K or smaller range. And the rule of thumb that we actually use internally too, if we're chatting with clients, is if there's 200K or more to be saved by optimizing images, then you should probably overall, then you should probably have a look at it.